And now, marine weather around Alaska.
We'll start off the marine segment here with tonight's weather. Front here across the Bering Sea connecting into the next system coming northward that'll bring increasing wind and rain after midnight and toward tomorrow for the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Look for some snow to get into the Pribilof Islands. Cold high pressure over the interior with lows well below zero. Arctic coast all the way down into the Kuskokwim Valley, and chilly for Bristol Bay, dry for Kodiak Island, and showers still possibility, just a slight threat there for the eastern North Gulf Coast, and a little bit better chance of the southern Panhandle, but if that occurs, it'll be light. And then for tomorrow, dry with some sun breaks across all of the southeast coast, and variably cloudy for the North Gulf Coast, maybe into the Copper River Basin, otherwise mostly clear and cold, all of interior Alaska. And a high wind warning out for the Alaska Peninsula due to this rather snappy low pulling northward here across eastern Aleutians. Could see gusts southeast in excess of 80 miles per hour till that front moves through. And then for the day on Monday, that low tracks off to the northwest. This portion of the front really weakens, keeps a chance of some light precipitation in over the eastern Aleutians. Next system here, edging northward onto the chart, brings increasing chances of rain, mostly just picking it up in some east-southeast flow off the Pacific there into Kodiak Island. And then this front will gradually lift northward as the main low center drifts a little farther north. That could bring gusty east winds, maybe some gale force winds on Tuesday to Kodiak and more rain. But the interior on Monday, cold and clear into the northern Panhandle, more clouds and a risk of a shower or two down over the southern southeast coast, mostly around Dixon Entrance. And for the coastal water forecast, north to northeast winds for the south coast tomorrow at 15 knots, north to east winds at 15 for the central coast. East winds 15 to 20, 7 to 8 foot seas for the north coast. Lynn Canal, north winds 25 knots, gusting 40 knots. Northeast at 20 for Stevens Passage, and Clarence Strait, southeast at 15 knots, 4 foot seas. And then on Monday, winds pick up here. Small craft advisories for the coast. East winds 25 to 30 knots with seas anywhere from 11 to 13 feet. Clarence Strait southeast at 20 knots, seas build to 7 feet. Northeast at 25 with 7 foot seas for Stevens Passage. Gale warnings now for Lynn Canal. North 35 knots, seas up to 9 feet. Prince William Sound, northeast wind 15 knots. Same thing for northern Cook Inlet. Northeasterlies at 15, but a little brisker here down for the southern inlet into Kamishak Bay, northeast at 30 in those areas, and east at 20 for the Barren Islands, North Gulf Coast, northeast winds 20 to 25 knots. And for Monday, Cook Inlet, northeast winds 20 to 30 knots. Gale warnings for the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay, northeast 35 to 40 knots. Same thing here for the western North Gulf Coast. Prince William Sound, northeast at 20. And for the eastern North Gulf Coast, east-northeast 20 to 30 knots with seas up 8 to 9 feet. Kodiak Island tomorrow, small craft advisories, east to southeast winds at 25 knots. Gale force easterlies for Bristol Bay at 35 knots. And the Alaska Peninsula, looking at east winds at 40 to 50 knots with seas as high as 16 feet. And then for the day on Monday, we've got east to southeast winds 15 to 25 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. Gale force north to northeast winds for Kodiak Island at 35 knots and northeast 25 for Bristol Bay. And for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, for Unalaska Island, northeast 40 to 45 knots. And for Nikolsky, west-northwest 30 to 40 knots, southwest at 20 for Adak and Atka. And then winds anywhere from 20 to 35 knots from the west or south here for the western Aleutians. And then for the day on Monday, western Aleutians, west to southwest winds 30 to 35 knots, 25 knot winds there for Adak and Atka, and the eastern Aleutians, south to southwesterlies at 20 to 25 knots. And for the southwest coast here, we've got for the forecast tomorrow, good gales here for the Kuskokwim Delta coast and Nunivak Island, east at 40 knots, and those will blow right across St. Matthew Island. South or east to the south, winds will be east at 30 knots for the Pribilofs, east 30 for the Yukon Delta coast, and gale warnings for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island for east to northeast winds at 35. East winds 30 knots here. Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, Yukon Delta Coast. Gale warnings east 35 for the Kuskokwim Delta Coast. 45-knot winds out of the east with seas at around 20 feet for St. Matthew Island. South winds at 30 knots for the Pribilofs. And for the eastern Bulward Sea coast tomorrow, or actually the central and east side, west to southwest at 10 knots, south at 15 for the western Arctic coast, and east to northeast winds at 15 to 30 knots for the Chukchi Sea. And for the day on Monday, western Arctic coast here, east winds 30 knots, and for the Chukchi Sea, east to northeast winds 20 to 30 knots. Lightest winds here on the central coast out of the east at 10. And for the eastern Bulward Sea coast, east to northeast winds at 15 knots.